Welcome to Wild Cowboy Tales. Before you listen, let me know where you're listening from. The sun beat down like a blacksmith's hammer on the anvil of the Arizona desert, but the heat was nothing compared to the cold dread gripping Amelia Vance. Saved from the clutches of ruthless outlaws, she found herself captive to a far more terrifying fate: marriage to the son of her family's most hated enemy. This isn't just a rescue, it's a descent into a forbidden union, a desperate gamble for peace, and a desert wedding where love is a lie, and survival is the only vow. Chapter 1: Dust and Deliverance. The stench of sweat and stale tobacco clung to Amelia Vance like a shroud, mingling with the coppery tang of fear. Bound and gagged in the back of a derelict wagon, its canvas torn, she felt the relentless rhythm of the desert, each bump and jolt a cruel reminder of her captivity. The Slade Gang, a pack of rabid wolves, had ambushed her family's small caravan 2 days ago, killing her father and brother, stealing their meager earnings, and leaving her alive for a fate Amelia couldn't bear to contemplate. Her mouth was caked with dust, her throat raw from silent screams. She was out of tears, out of hope, leaving only a cold, bitter emptiness in her heart. The buzzards, patient and inevitable, were already circling high above, black specks against the blinding, indifferent sky. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked, sharp and immediate, slicing through the desert's vast silence. It was followed by a guttural yell, then another, louder shot. Amelia's heart, which had been a slow, dying drum, lurched with a desperate and welcome flicker of hope. She pressed her face against the rough canvas, trying to see, to understand. More shouts, the frantic whinny of horses, and the unmistakable, chilling thud of a body hitting the hard ground. The wagon lurched violently, then came to a screeching halt. Heavy footsteps pounded nearby, then faded. Silence descended again, but this time it was different. It hummed with a tense aftermath, not the desolate quiet of waiting for death. A rough hand tore back the canvas flap. Amelia flinched, bracing herself for another monstrous face, another leer. Instead, she was met by as the color of a stormy sky, framed by a face hardened by sun and sorrow, a stern jawline barely hidden beneath a week's growth of dark stubble. He was tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a dust-caked duster and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. A cold peacemaker, still smoking faintly, was holstered at his hip, and a Winchester rifle was slung across his back. He looked at her, his gaze intense, assessing. Without a word, he reached in and cut the ropes binding her wrists and ankles. His movements were efficient, almost brutal, devoid of any comforting touch. As her hands were freed, Amelia instinctively tore the gag from her mouth, gulping down the dusty air. "Are you hurt, miss?" His voice was a low rumble, surprisingly deep, carrying the gravelly edge of a man who rarely spoke. Amelia shook her head, her throat too dry for words. She pushed herself up, her limbs aching, her senses reeling. She saw 2 of Slade's men sprawled lifelessly in the dust, their blood staining the earth. The third, Slade himself, lay a few feet away, his chest not moving. Her rescuer hadn't just fought them off, he had dispatched them with a cold, brutal efficiency that spoke of long experience with violence. Who are you?" she finally croaked, her gaze sweeping over his rugged and yielding face. He looked at her, his storm-colored eyes narrowing. "Ryder Thorne," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. The name hit Amelia like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Ryder Thorne, the son of Elias Thorne, patriarch of the Thorne Ranch, the hated rival of her own family, the Vances. For generations, the Vance and Thorne families had been locked in a bitter feud over land, water rights, and ancient grievances, a blood feud that had claimed lives on both sides, including, she suspected, the true cause of her father's ill-fated journey. Her initial relief curdled into icy dread, quickly replaced by a surge of cold fury. This man, this brutal rescuer, carried the brand of the very family responsible for so much of her suffering. Her deliverance from the outlaws was not a true freedom, but a prelude to a deeper, more insidious captivity. She had been saved, but by an enemy, and the desert, vast and indifferent, seemed to whisper a new, more terrifying fate. Chapter 2: The Weight of a Name. The silence that followed Ryder Thorne's introduction was heavier than any desert stone, thick with generations of unspoken hatred. Amelia stared at him, her emerald eyes, usually sparkling with life, now burning with a cold fire. The man who had just saved her life was the heir to the family that had systematically eroded her own family's holdings, seizing prime grazing land, diverting water, and subtly, relentlessly, pushing them to the brink of ruin. Her gratitude, a fleeting warmth in her ravaged heart, had been extinguished, replaced by a bitter, familiar animosity. Thorn, she spat, the name a curse on her tongue, the sound raspier than she intended. What do you want? Her hands clenched into fists, even though she knew she was utterly helpless. Ryder, seemingly unfazed by her hostility, merely surveyed the carnage around them. He knelt beside the dead stagecoach driver, checking for a pulse, a brief, almost clinical assessment. "You can't stay here, Miss Vance," he stated, his gaze sweeping the desolate landscape. "More wolves will come. The Slade gang was just petty thieves, but there are others. And the desert won't wait long to claim its due." He spoke with an undeniable logic, a stark pragmatism that cut through her anger. She was a woman alone, without a horse, without provisions, stranded in a land that cared nothing for human suffering. But to accept help from a Thorn, it felt like a betrayal of her father, her brother, of every Vance who had fought and died against his kind. "I'd rather die in the dust than take a single step towards your family's hospitality," she retorted, her voice gaining strength despite her parched throat. Ryder finally looked at her directly, his storm-colored eyes unreadable. "It's not about hospitality, Miss Vance. It's about survival. And right now, your options are limited." He walked to his horse, a sturdy dun-colored Mustang, and returned with a canteen. "Drink. You're dehydrated." Amelia eyed the canteen suspiciously, but her body screamed for water. Her pride warred with her primal need. After a moment of internal struggle, she snatched it from his hand, drinking deeply, greedily, cool water a balm to her parched throat. He watched her without comment, his expression unchanging. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, after she had sated her immediate thirst. "My ranch," he replied, already turning to secure the remaining supplies from the ambushed wagon. "It's the closest safe haven." "Your ranch," the words were an affront. To step onto foreign land, to breathe the air polluted by their greed, felt like crossing an unforgivable line. "I refuse." Ryder stopped, turning slowly to face her. His voice, when he spoke, was low, but carried an undeniable authority. "Miss Vance, your refusal changes nothing. You have no horse, no food, no water, and no protection. I am taking you to my ranch. You can fight me every step of the way, but you will still go. Understand?" There was no malice in his tone, just a cold and wavering resolve. He was a man accustomed to making decisions and seeing them through, regardless of objections. Amelia felt a surge of helpless fury. He had saved her, only to make her a prisoner. She was still bound, not by ropes, but by circumstances, and by the unyielding will of her rescuer, who was, inexplicably, her family's enemy. She hated him for his calm control, for the burden of his name, for the impossible situation he had thrust upon her. But beneath the anger, a cold fear gnawed. She was trapped. Trapped by the desert, and trapped by a Thorn. The vast, indifferent sky seemed to stretch endlessly above them, a canvas for her unspoken dread. She had been saved, only to find herself walking deeper into the heart of her enemy's domain, a forced march towards an unknown, and likely terrible fate. Chapter 3. An Unlikely Proposal. The journey to the Thorn Ranch was a silent torment for Amelia. She rode behind Ryder on his Mustang, the heat of his body a constant and welcome presence against her back. Every mile further into Thorn territory felt like a betrayal, every creak of the saddle a mockery of her family's fallen pride. Ryder spoke only to issue practical instructions, his voice curt, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He was a man carved from the harsh landscape, as unyielding and as enigmatic as the ancient rock formations around them. When they finally arrived, the Thorn Ranch was far grander than she had imagined, a sprawling estate nestled in a fertile valley carved by a permanent spring. Lush green pastures, well-maintained fences, and a formidable stone and adobe ranch house stood in stark contrast to the barren dust of the Vance homestead, a testament to the Thorns' prosperity and the Vances' slow, agonizing decline. It only intensified Amelia's bitterness. Ryder dismounted with practiced ease, then offered her a hand. Amelia ignored it, swinging her leg over the saddle with a stiff pride, stumbling slightly as her weak legs hit the ground. He watched her without judgment, then led her inside the cool, surprisingly well-furnished house. There were a few ranch hands, rugged men who gave her wary, assessing glances, but none approached. The atmosphere was one of quiet efficiency, a stark contrast to the boisterous, often violent, image she held of the Thorn clan. After a simple meal, eaten in strained silence, Ryder led her to a comfortable guest room, surprisingly clean and well-kept. "Rest, Miss Vance," he said, his voice softer than before, though still gruff. "We can talk in the morning." He left without another word, closing the door behind him. Amelia was exhausted, physically and emotionally, but sleep offered no escape from the tangled web of her captivity. The next morning, after a breakfast she barely touched, Ryder led her to a large, oak-paneled study. The room was filled with maps, legal documents, and a formidable collection of books, a surprising intellectual bent for a man she considered a brute. He gestured to a chair, and she sat stiffly, her back ramrod straight. Ryder stood before a large map of the territory, his finger tracing the disputed boundaries between the Vance and Thorn lands. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice devoid of emotion, "I didn't bring you here for spite, or for vengeance. I brought you here because a fragile peace hangs by a thread." Amelia scoffed. "Peace? There's been no peace between our families for generations, only stolen land and spilled blood." "Precisely," Ryder countered, turning to face her, his storm-colored eyes holding hers. "And that's why this has to end. Governor Sterling has brokered an agreement, a treaty to finally end the Vance-Thorn feud, to consolidate land claims, and to prevent further bloodshed in this territory. And you, Miss Vance, are central to that treaty." Amelia frowned, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "What are you talking about?" Ryder's gaze was unwavering. "The terms are simple, yet binding. To seal the peace, to unite the land, and to ensure no further claim of grievance can be made, a union is required. A marriage between our families." He paused, his gaze hardening slightly. "You, Amelia Vance, are to marry me, Ryder Thorn." The words struck Amelia with the force of a physical blow. Her mind reeled. Marriage? To her enemy? The very idea was an abomination, a sacrilege against her family's memory, against her own heart. She felt a wave of nausea, her vision blurring. "No," she whispered, the word a choked gasp. "Never. I won't. I can't." Ryder's expression remained stern. "You will, Miss Vance. Or the alternative is a war that your family, now without its patriarch, cannot possibly win. Governor Sterling's decree is clear. Without this union, the Vance holdings will be absorbed into the territory, and your family will lose everything they have left. Your family's survival, their land, their very legacy, it rests on your acceptance." He wasn't asking, he was stating an inescapable truth. Amelia was saved from robbers, only to find herself facing a far more devastating form of captivity, a forbidden desert wedding, an unthinkable union with her sworn enemy. All for the sake of a fragile, desperate peace. She was a pawn, offered up on the altar of a brutal and forgiving West. Chapter 4. The Terms of Surrender. Amelia stared at Ryder, her mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of his words. Marriage. To him, the idea was repulsive, a betrayal of everything she believed in. She felt a burning resentment, a sense of outrage that threatened to consume her. "This is blackmail," she cried, pushing herself to her feet, her voice trembling with barely suppressed fury. "You can't force me into this. I won't allow it." Ryder remained impassive, his gaze unwavering. "It is not blackmail, Miss Vance. It is a negotiation, brokered by the territorial governor himself. The Vance and Thorn families have been a festering wound in this region for too long. Governor Sterling seeks stability. This marriage is his solution. A permanent end to the feud, a consolidation of resources, and a symbol of a new era. Or, as I said, the alternative is ruin for your family." "My family will never agree to this," she retorted, her hands clenched into fists. "They would rather fight." "They have fought, Miss Vance," Ryder stated, his voice flat. "And they have lost much. Your father is dead. Your brother too. The Vance numbers are few. Your remaining kin, few and scattered, are not in a position to defy the governor. Their lands are already teetering on the brink of being declared and settled and forfeit. This marriage is the only way to protect what little they have left." He laid out the grim truth with a brutal clarity that left her no room for argument. Amelia felt a cold despair settle over her. He was right. Her family was decimated, scattered. Her father, a proud man, would have fought to the last, but his fight was over. Now, the burden of their legacy, of their very survival, fell to her, to a forced union with the man she was raised to despise. It was a bitter, unbearable pill. "And you," she challenged, her voice low and laced with venom. "Are you so eager to marry your enemy? To bet Vance?" A flicker of something, a shadow of an emotion, passed through Ryder's storm-colored eyes, quickly veiled. "Eagerness has nothing to do with it, Miss Vance. My duty is to my family, to ensure their prosperity, and to safeguard their future. This marriage achieves that. It also ends a senseless cycle of violence that has claimed too many lives on both sides." He spoke of duty, of pragmatism, but Amelia saw no joy, no desire, in his demeanor. He was as much a captive of this arrangement as she was, bound by the expectations of his name and the will of powerful men. "This is not a marriage," Amelia said, her voice shaking. "It's a surrender, a desecration. Call it what you will," Ryder replied, stepping closer, his presence commanding. "But it will happen. The wedding is set for 2 weeks from now, at the sacred Mesa Verde, a place known to both our families. The governor himself will preside, along with a tribal elder and a circuit preacher. It will be witnessed, and it will be binding. You have 2 weeks to prepare yourself, Miss Vance. You can do so with grace, or with defiance. The outcome remains the same." He dismissed her with a curt nod, leaving her alone in the study, surrounded by the silent witnesses of maps and legal documents that now sealed her fate. Amelia sank into the chair, her strength draining from her. The desert sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a metaphor for the fragile, fleeting nature of her own freedom. She had been saved from immediate death, only to be condemned to a living death, a forbidden desert wedding that would bind her to her enemy, an act of surrender forced upon her for the sake of a shattered legacy. She was not a bride, she was a sacrifice. And the bitter taste of that truth was more potent than any desert thirst. Chapter 5. A Glimmer of Humanity. The 2 weeks leading up to the forced wedding were a blur of numb dread for Amelia. She moved through the Thorn Ranch like a ghost, a prisoner in all but name. She was given new, respectable clothes, but they felt like a costume for her own execution. She spent her days walking the grounds, observing the ranch hands, the cattle, the vast expanse of land that would soon, inextricably, be tied to her. She spoke little, withdrawing into herself, fueling her resentment with silent fury. Ryder, for his part, maintained his distance, his stern demeanor unwavering. He oversaw the ranch with an iron hand, his presence commanding, yet strangely remote. Amelia watched him from afar, trying to find the monster she had always imagined, the ruthless land grabber, the embodiment of her family's suffering. But what she saw was a man burdened, serious, and deeply competent. He rode the range tirelessly, dealt with his men fairly, and treated his livestock with a surprising gentleness. He was a paradox, a man of violence and quiet strength, her enemy, yet undeniably honorable in his own harsh way. One afternoon a sudden, violent dust storm swept across the valley, a common occurrence in the desert, but this one was particularly fierce. The sky turned an ominous ochre, the wind howled like a banshee, tearing at anything not nailed down. The ranch hands scrambled to secure livestock, their shouts barely audible above the gale. Amelia found herself drawn outside, watching the raw power of the storm, a reflection of the tempest raging within her. Suddenly, a cry for help pierced the roar of the wind. A young ranch hand, trying to secure a runaway horse, had been thrown and pinned beneath a fallen fence post. The horse, spooked, galloped wildly, threatening to trample him. Without hesitation, Ryder sprinted towards the commotion, his duster whipping around him. He fought against the wind, his powerful frame a bulwark against the elements. Amelia watched, her heart pounding. He wrestled the terrified horse, soothing it with a low, calm voice, even as it thrashed and kicked. Then, with a grunt of exertion, he lifted the heavy fence post from the injured man, freeing him. He then expertly assessed the ranch hand's broken leg, giving precise instructions to another worker before carrying the injured man back to the relative safety of the bunkhouse. When Ryder finally returned to the main house, his face was streaked with dust and sweat, his hair matted. He saw Amelia watching him from the porch, her anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by a reluctant awe. Their eyes met, and for the first time, the animosity between them seemed to soften, if only for a fleeting moment. In his storm-colored eyes, she saw not the calculating enemy, but a man driven by responsibility, by a fierce, protective instinct. He was still her jailer, the architect of her forced fate, but this glimpse of his humanity, his raw courage in the face of danger, chipped away at the hardened shell of her hatred. He nodded curtly to her, then disappeared inside, leaving Amelia standing on the porch as the storm began to subside, the air cleansed, though still heavy with the scent of dust and the unexpected realization that her enemy was not as simple or as monstrous as she had always believed. The forbidden dessert wedding still loomed, a bitter certainty, but a fragile understanding, a tiny seed of something akin to respect, had been planted in the harsh and forgiving soil of her heart. Chapter 6: Escape and Capture. The brief and comfortable truce forged during the dust storm was quickly shattered by Amelia's own desperation. The impending wedding loomed like a thundercloud, smothering any fragile respect she might have felt for Ryder. She couldn't do it. She couldn't betray her family, her very soul, by marrying a thorn. Escape, however foolhardy, was her only recourse. She planned meticulously, using her forced freedom on the ranch to observe routines, identify weak points. She chose a moonless night, the vast desert a blanket of impenetrable darkness. She slipped out of her room, a small bundle of necessities clutched in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. She bypassed the sleeping ranch hands, crept past the stables, and made her way to the outlying corrals where the thorn horses grazed. She knew horses, had ridden since childhood. She chose a small, nimble mare, quiet as a shadow, and with deft hands, saddled and bridled her. With a final, desperate glance back at the sprawling thorn ranch, a symbol of her impending doom, Amelia spurred the mare into a gallop, disappearing into the vast, whispering darkness of the desert. Freedom was a potent elixir, filling her lungs with cool night air, urging her onward. She rode hard through the night, pushing the mare, until the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky. She felt a surge of exhilaration, a fierce joy that she had defied them, defied Ryder, defied her fate. But the desert was a cruel mistress, and forgiving to the unprepared. By midday, the sun beat down with its usual ferocity. She was lost, her water dangerously low, and the mare, though sturdy, was tiring. Her joy began to curdle into cold fear. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she saw movement. Not Ryder, she hoped, but a small, dilapidated shack, smoke curling from its chimney. A chance for water, for respite. She approached cautiously, dismounting, her hand on the small derringer she'd managed to hide in her boot. As she neared the shack, two rough-looking men emerged, their faces hard, their eyes predatory. They wore the faded remnants of the Slade gang's insignia, a chilling sight. "Well, well, look what we have here," one of them drawled, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "A Vance, and a pretty one at that. Heard you went missing, little bird. Seems you flew right into our trap." Amelia's blood ran cold. She was out of the frying pan and into the fire. She drew her derringer, but before she could aim, the other man moved with surprising speed, disarming her. They laughed, their eyes raking over her with open menace. Her brief taste of freedom had led her to a fate worse than the forced wedding. Just as they began to drag her towards the shack, a single sharp rifle shot cracked through the air. The first outlaw cried out, clutching his shoulder, staggering back. The second, startled, looked around wildly. Then, a figure emerged from the shimmering heat haze, a lone rider on a dun Mustang. Ryder Thorne. He rode in like an avenging angel, his rifle already raised. Two more quick shots, and the remaining outlaw was down, writhing in the dust. Ryder dismounted, his face a mask of grim fury. He looked at the injured outlaw, then at Amelia, his storm-colored eyes burning with a controlled rage. "Fool girl," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "What in hell did you think you were doing?" Amelia, shaken and humiliated, could only stare at him. She had tried to escape her enemy, only to be rescued by him again. But this time, amidst his anger, she saw something else in his eyes, a genuine concern, a flicker of fear for her safety. He had tracked her, pursued her, not just to recapture her, but to protect her. The lines between rescuer and jailer, between enemy and something else, were blurring, twisting into a complex knot she couldn't untangle. The forbidden dessert wedding still loomed, but Ryder Thorne, her reluctant rescuer, was proving to be an enigma she was slowly, terrifyingly, beginning to understand. Chapter 7. The Road to the Altar. Ryder's anger was a palpable force, more unsettling than any outright fury. He bound the surviving outlaw, left him for the circuit sheriff, and then turned to Amelia, his gaze piercing. "You could have been killed," he stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Or worse. You think the dessert is a friend. It's a killer. And you, Miss Vance, are as green as they come." Amelia, still trembling from her near capture, felt a rush of shame, followed by a familiar defiance. "I was trying to escape a prison, Mr. Thorne. A marriage I despise. And you ran headlong into another one," he countered, his jaw tight. "The world outside the ranch is not a gentle place. Especially for a woman alone. Especially for a Vance, whose family is a target." He didn't say our family, but the implication hung heavy in the air. He helped her back onto the mare, then led them both towards the west, not back to his ranch, but towards Mesa Verde, the ancient, sacred plateau where their forced wedding was to take place. The journey was long and arduous, pushing them through a forgotten landscape of towering sandstone formations and wine-carved canyons. They rode in tense silence for hours, the recent events a heavy presence between them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Ryder chose a secluded alcove for their camp. He started a small, smokeless fire, cooked a simple meal of jerky and beans, and offered her his canteen. The harshness of the dessert, the constant threat of unseen dangers, created an intimacy born of necessity. "Why did you track me?" Amelia finally asked, her voice barely a whisper, breaking the silence that had stretched for hours. "You could have let them take me. It would have saved you a troublesome bride." Ryder looked at the fire, his profile silhouetted against the dancing flames. "Because it wouldn't have solved anything," he replied, his voice gruff. "The governor's decree, the peace treaty, it hinges on this marriage. If you died, or were taken, the feud would reignite. More lives would be lost. On both sides. Your life, Miss Vance, is now tied to a larger purpose. And my duty is to see that purpose fulfilled." His words, cold and pragmatic, still held a sting of truth. But she sensed something more, something, and said, in his weary tone, "Is that all it is?" She pressed, her emerald eyes searching his shadowed face. "Duty." He paused, staring into the flames. "Our families, they have been fighting over this land for too long. My grandfather, your great-uncle, they started this madness. It has devoured generations. I am tired of it, Amelia. Tired of the bloodshed. Tired of the hate." He finally looked at her, his storm-colored eyes holding a flicker of raw weariness, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "This marriage, it's a bitter pill for both of us. But it's a chance. A chance to finally put an end to it." Amelia listened, truly listened, for the first time. She saw not just the enemy, but a man burdened by history, by a generational curse he sought to break. He was a product of the feud, just as she was, but he harbored a profound weariness for its endless cycle of violence. A reluctant respect began to bloom in her heart, a fragile seed struggling to take root in the arid soil of their shared past. The road to the altar was long and fraught with peril, but as they sat under the vast, indifferent desert sky, sharing a meager meal, Amelia realized that their journey was more than just a forced march. It was a reluctant pilgrimage towards an uncertain future, where the lines between enemy and partner were blurring. And a forbidden wedding might just be the first step towards an unforeseen alliance. Chapter 8. The Desert's Vows. The journey to Mesa Verde was a crucible, stripping away the layers of animosity and revealing a grudging and spoken understanding between Amelia and Ryder. They spoke little, but their actions spoke volumes. He shared his dwindling water, pointed out signs of danger, and silently offered her warmth during the cold desert nights. She, in turn, began to anticipate his needs, assisting with camp duties, and even occasionally offering a rare, tentative observation about the landscape or the wildlife. The desert, unforgiving and vast, forced them into a reluctant coexistence, a fragile partnership forged in the crucible of survival. As they ascended the final, winding path to the Mesa Verde, Amelia felt a strange mix of trepidation and resignation. The Mesa, a flat-topped, ancient plateau, was a place of stark beauty, sacred to the local Apache tribes and a traditional neutral ground for resolving disputes. It was the perfect, desolate backdrop for a wedding born not of love, but of necessity. They found a small gathering awaiting them. Governor Sterling, a portly man with a nervous demeanor, stood beside a stern-faced Apache elder, his weathered face a roadmap of ancient wisdom. A circuit preacher, his Bible clutched in hand, stood ready, and a handful of somber-faced Vance and Thorne family members, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and barely concealed resentment, formed a small, tense audience. Amelia spotted her Aunt Sarah, her only surviving immediate family member, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. Ryder dismounted, his face grim but resolute. He offered Amelia a hand, and this time, she took it, her fingers cool against his calloused palm. They walked towards the makeshift altar, a natural stone outcropping, the silence heavy with the weight of generations of conflict. Governor Sterling cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly in the vast open air. "We are gathered here today under the sacred sky to witness a union that will finally bring peace to these troubled lands." He spoke of the blood feud, of the lives lost, and of the desperate need for a new beginning. The Apache elder then stepped forward, his eyes ancient and wise. He spoke in his native tongue, a melodic, guttural language, then translated. "The earth remembers. The sky sees. Two rivers, once separated by a canyon of hate, now seek to merge. Let the joining be true, not just in body, but in spirit, for the sake of the land and the children yet to come." Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine. His words were a powerful reminder that this was more than just a legal formality. It was a spiritual covenant with the very land they stood upon, a sacred, binding act. When it came time for the vows, the preacher, a gaunt man with a booming voice, asked the traditional questions. Amelia and Ryder stood side by side, their hands not touching, their gazes fixed on the horizon, avoiding each other's eyes. "Do you, Amelia Vance, take this man, Ryder Thorne, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to honor and obey, in sickness and in health, till death do you part?" Amelia paused, the words catching in her throat. Honor and obey. Marrying her enemy. It felt like a desecration. But then she looked at Aunt Sarah, at the weary faces of the Vance kin, at the vast, indifferent desert that had witnessed so much bloodshed. Her father's memory, her family's survival, the weight of generations pressed down on her. "I do," she whispered, the words barely audible, a testament not to love, but to sacrifice. Ryder's turn. His voice, when he spoke, was low and firm, echoing across the mesa. "Do you, Ryder Thorne, take this woman, Amelia Vance, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and to cherish, in sickness and in health, till death do you part?" He paused, his storm-colored eyes sweeping over Amelia, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "I do," he stated, the words a solemn, binding promise. The preacher pronounced them man and wife. There was no kiss, no embrace, only a profound, almost aching silence. The desert, ancient and eternal, had witnessed their forbidden wedding, a union born of necessity, sealed not by affection, but by the desperate hope for an end to bloodshed. Amelia Vance, now Amelia Thorne, was saved, but had married her enemy, and the bitter taste of that vow would forever cling to her, even as the new and certain horizon stretched before them. Chapter 9. Unveiled Truths. The wedding night at the Thorne Ranch was a stark, silent affair. Amelia was led back to her guest room, which now felt more like a prison than ever. Ryder, after a few curt words to his foreman, disappeared into his own quarters. The marriage was a formality, a political necessity, not a union of hearts or bodies. Amelia lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the vows echoing in her ears, the weight of her new name pressing down on her. The next morning, the tension at the ranch was palpable. The few remaining Vance kin quickly departed, their faces a mix of relief and barely concealed shame. The Thorne Ranch hands, now accustomed to her presence, gave her wary glances, unsure how to treat the new mistress, who was also the daughter of their family's bitter rival. Ryder, however, surprised her. After breakfast, he led her back to the study, the room where he had first delivered his shocking proposal. This time, he didn't stand over the map. He sat opposite her, his expression serious, holding a dusty, leather-bound journal. "Amelia," he began, his voice surprisingly gentle, using her given name for the first time since the wedding. "There's more to this feud than you know. More than our fathers or grandfathers ever let on." He opened the journal. "This was my grandfather's. He kept it hidden. It details the true beginning of the Vance Thorn conflict." Amelia leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" Ryder's gaze was direct. "Our families weren't always enemies. Generations ago, they were partners, working together, pooling resources to establish this territory, to carve out a life in the wilderness. But then, a third party arrived. A powerful land speculator, Elias Thorne's business partner, a man named Sterling, an ancestor of the current governor. He saw opportunity in division. He systematically manipulated both our families, feeding lies, forging documents, instigating disputes over water and land, all to create discord, to weaken us. So he could eventually swoop in and buy up the contested lands cheap." Amelia gasped, a cold dread creeping into her heart. "Sterling. Governor Sterling." Ryder nodded grimly. "His family has been doing it for generations, playing both sides, profiting from our animosity. My grandfather eventually discovered the truth, saw the manipulation, but by then, the hatred was too deeply ingrained. He tried to expose Sterling, but he was silenced, discredited. He recorded everything in this journal, hoping that one day, a Thorne and a Vance might be able to see the truth and break the cycle." The revelation hit Amelia with the force of a thunderclap. The generations of hatred, the bloodshed, the ruin of her family, it had all been a lie, a carefully orchestrated deception. Their feud was a puppet show, with the Sterling family pulling the strings. The governor, who had just officiated their wedding, who had preached peace, was the descendant of the very architect of their destruction. "My father," Amelia whispered, her voice filled with a fresh, terrible grief. "He died believing he was fighting your family. He never knew." "Neither did mine," Ryder replied, his voice heavy with his own burden of inherited guilt. "They were all pawns, Amelia. Blinded by hatred, manipulated by a cunning enemy." He closed the journal, his gaze meeting hers. "This forced marriage, it was designed by Governor Sterling to consolidate his own power, to complete his family's long-term plan. He forces us to marry, absorbs the Vance holdings into the Thorne name, and then controls everything through us. He thinks we're too blinded by our feud, too weak, to see his true intentions. He thinks we're just another piece in his empire." The forbidden desert wedding, born of desperation and perceived duty, now revealed itself as a deeper, more insidious trap. They weren't just husband and wife, they were unwitting instruments in a grander conspiracy. Amelia had been saved, only to marry her enemy, but now, a shared truth, a far more dangerous enemy, had united them in a way no forced vow ever could. The desert wedding was over, but the real battle had just begun, a fight not for land or pride, but for the very truth, and their freedom from a manipulation buried for centuries. Chapter 10. An Alliance Forged. The truth, raw and devastating, hung between them, shattering the last vestiges of their inherited animosity. Amelia stared at Ryder, her heart a tangled knot of grief, anger, and a startling, newfound clarity. The Thorne-Vance feud, the very foundation of her hatred, was a lie. Her family, her father, had died fighting a phantom, while the true enemy, the Sterling dynasty, had silently profited. Governor Sterling, Amelia breathed, the name now a viper on her tongue. He orchestrated this peace treaty, this marriage, to finish what his ancestors started. Ryder nodded, his storm-colored eyes glinting with a cold, focused anger. He's consolidating power, buying up contested lands with his development projects. He controls key politicians, judges, even some of the territorial marshals. Our marriage, meant to end the feud, simply removes the last major obstacle to his complete dominance. He assumes we'll be too busy hating each other, or too beholden to him, to ever uncover his schemes. He underestimated us, Amelia said, a fierce spark igniting in her emerald eyes. The victim, the pawn, was gone, replaced by a woman consumed by a righteous fury. Her personal hatred for Ryder Thorne had dissolved, replaced by a shared, burning need for justice against a far more insidious foe. Ryder offered her his grandfather's journal. This, along with my father's own notes, implicates the Sterlings through 3 generations. It's not enough to bring him down outright, not yet. But it's a start. We need more proof, Amelia. Something undeniable that can't be bought or buried. A strange, unprecedented alliance formed between them in that study, not with words of love or affection, but with a silent, steely resolve. They were husband and wife by legal decree, but now they were partners by choice, bound by a dangerous secret and a common, powerful enemy. The forbidden dessert wedding, born of manipulation, had inadvertently forged a union far stronger than any traditional vows. Over the next few weeks, they worked together, sifting through old ranch records, piecing together fragments of information. Amelia, with her sharp mind and keen memory, recalled details her father had mentioned: suspicious land deals, unexpected accidents that befell settlers. Ryder, with his vast network of contacts and his understanding of the territory's political landscape, began to connect the dots, uncovering evidence of corrupt land grants, stolen water rights, and subtle acts of sabotage designed to weaken the independent ranchers. Their forced marriage became a strategic advantage. Under the guise of a newly united power couple, they attended social gatherings, listened to whispers, and observed Governor Sterling's movements, always with a calculated detachment that masked their true intentions. Amelia found herself playing a role she never imagined, the dutiful wife of the powerful rancher, charming when necessary, observing everything. Ryder, in turn, learned to trust her instincts, her quiet observations proving invaluable. One evening, as they sat in the study, poring over maps of disputed territory, Amelia looked at Ryder. "We're risking everything, aren't we?" she asked, her voice low. He met her gaze, his storm-colored eyes holding a depth she was only beginning to truly understand. "Everything. But the alternative, letting Sterling continue to carve up this territory, letting our family's sacrifices be in vain, that's a price I'm not willing to pay. Are you?" Amelia shook her head, a grim, determined smile touching her lips. "Not anymore. He took my family, my legacy, then tried to make me his pawn. He picked the wrong woman, Ryder Thorne." He returned her smile, a rare, genuine curve of his lips. There was no romance in that smile, not yet, perhaps never in the traditional sense. But there was respect, a fierce camaraderie, and a shared purpose that resonated deeper than any forced affection. The bond between them, forged in the fires of an ancient feud and a dangerous conspiracy, was growing, strong and resilient. The West was a vast, untamed land, full of dangers both seen and unseen. But Amelia Vance, now Amelia Thorne, no longer faced it alone. She had been saved, then forced to marry her enemy. But in that forbidden dessert wedding, she had found not a prison, but an unlikely partner, and together, they would ride towards a new horizon, not as a loveless couple, but as an unbreakable alliance, ready to challenge the true shadows that sought to control the soul of the untamed frontier.